I'm Rick Goldring, Mayor of the City of Burlington, and welcome to Burlington Matters. Burlington Matters is a program here on your TV featuring discussion about people and events that are occurring within the City of Burlington. Today we're talking about Conservation Halton and the role of Conservation Halton in the City of Burlington, in the region of Halton, and the whole watershed that Conservation Halton serves. Many people know about Rattlesnake Point and Crawford Lake and Kelso and Glen Eden and Mount Nemo and so on and so forth, which are great attractions managed by Conservation Halton. But many people don't know the tremendous range and scope of service that Conservation Halton provides to the communities within the watershed of Conservation Halton. So with me today are two guests. We have the Chief Administrative Officer of Conservation Halton, Hassan Bassat, and we have Kim Barrett, who is the Associate Director for Science and Partnerships. So welcome to you both. Thank you very much for agreeing to be on the program. But as I started at the outset, many people are aware of the attractions that I mentioned, but not aware of the tremendous scope and range of area that Conservation Halton serves. So Hassan, why don't you give us a thumbnail sketch about the role of the conservation authorities and the role of Conservation Halton?
Great, thank you for having us, Mayor Goldring. And you kind of nailed it at the beginning where you mentioned the word watershed. And Conservation Halton's one of 36 conservation authorities in the province, and CAs, or conservation authorities, formed based on watersheds, which are kind of natural boundaries that follow the drainage areas associated with the creeks. And so that's how CAs came into being. Now within our watershed, we've got a large jurisdiction. It's about 1,000 square kilometers, so it includes most of Halton region. It also includes parts of Hamilton, parts of Mississauga, and Wellington County. So it's a huge watershed that we manage. And within that, as you said, a lot of people know us for our parks. We've got 7 really good, vibrant parks that are amazing green spaces. But beyond that, we have responsibilities for managing surface flooding from creeks and rivers. So we manage flood control structures, channels. We're responsible for monitoring all sorts of weather conditions, modeling the impacts of various storms, and then issuing those warnings to our municipal partners, emergency services, school boards, and the media. So that's a very important role that we play, and as part of that, in Halton, we've got 4 dams, we've got channels, 12.5 kilometers of channels that we manage. And then on the other side of that is our regulatory role. So we are involved in, as a planning body, where we're looking at hazard lands, and essentially it's about trying to protect homes, businesses, and people from flooding and flood hazards from a more proactive planning approach. So it's trying to keep the people and their properties out of harm's way associated with hazard lands associated with creeks and waterways. And then we've morphed over the past 60 years that we've been in existence here into doing lots of environmental monitoring to generate science and data so we can make good planning decisions. We have some excellent stewardship programs, which is really encouraging owners of natural areas and water bodies to improve their private properties, and if we can help them in any way to do that. And then education, we're one of the largest providers of outdoor experiential education. So there's a lot that goes on at Conservation Halton.
So you're going to segue it over to Kim. Kim is the manager or director of Science and Partnerships.
That's right.
So what does that mean?
Well, we have a pretty diverse group. We have a number of monitoring ecologists who are responsible for...
You have a number of monitoring ecologists?
Yes.
Is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay.
So those are the folks who go out and take water samples. We count how many birds are in the forest and look at, how are forest interior birds doing, how are generalist bird species doing. So we collect the information that essentially tells the community what the health of the watershed is like. So that's one group. We also have stewardship and restoration staff. So our stewardship staff work one-on-one with private landowners to talk to them about the natural features on their properties, find out what the homeowners' concerns are about the property, what kinds of projects they might be interested in undertaking, and they provide advice to homeowners about potential projects that they can do, and they actually help them find funding in many instances to undertake these restoration projects. We also have community outreach staff in my group. So community outreach staff go out to different events and provide information to the public about the services that we offer. general things like taking care of your properties. We offer.
What do you mean by taking care of your properties?
What I mean by taking care of your property is essentially managing properties in such a way that it's, there are benefits to the landowner, but there are also benefits to the environment. So, for example,
These would be in areas that are close to the watershed.
Potentially,
or anywhere.
Yeah. All of our properties are in the watershed, but
Right.
So some of these properties may have a creek running through it that maybe the homeowner is currently mowing right up to the edges. So we may talk to them about the benefits of leaving a buffer strip on either side of that watercourse, because that helps to intercept any contaminants that might be flowing towards the creeks. We also do projects like tree planting to increase forest cover in the watershed, which, as we know, is a good thing.
So how do we measure, or how do you measure the health of the Conservation Halton watershed?
Well, we have a number of indicators. So on the water quality side, the kind of traditional method of doing that is that you go out and scoop up a bottle or a jar of water, send it off to the lab, and they'll tell you, what contaminants are in it, what kind of metals, that kind of stuff. That kind of gives you a snapshot of what water quality is like at that particular point in time at that particular spot. But moving beyond that, we also use bugs that live in the water. So benthic invertebrates are species that are, some of them are very sensitive to changes in water quality. So if you have poor water quality, there are some species that you just won't find there.
So you have at least one degree in science, if not a couple, I'm sure.
Yes, I do.
So your background is, tell us about your educational background.
Well, I have a Bachelor of Science degree and a Master of Science degree from the University of Guelph. And I did my master's research by putting transmitters on wood turtles and following them around Algonquin Park.
Wow.
It was a lot of fun.
And you're speaking to somebody who took 2 sciences in high school because I had to. And I wish now, with my job, I wish I had more background in science. But sorry for that little
okay.
diversion there. So you mentioned measuring the health of the watershed. You mentioned the water quality. You mentioned looking for species.
Yeah, so we actually have about 2,000 species in our watershed that we monitor. We don't find them all every year because some are rarer than others. So we use those species as indicators of habitat quality, essentially. So on the bird side of things, there are some birds who have very particular habitat needs. They like deep interior forests because they're very sensitive to disturbance. So if we find those species, then we know that that forest is performing that specific function for those birds. That's quite important and crucial to their being there.
And how have you rated us over the last number of years?
Well, we have...
are we maintaining, or are we regressing?
I think
are we progressing?
Overall, the news is good, actually. If you look back at air photos from the 1950s, we had a lot more agriculture at that time. There was a lot less forest cover. There have been a lot of tree planting programs over the years, and we're actually making good gains in forest cover in the watershed. Water quality, it's a similar story. There's been a lot of education and people learning about things like phosphorus. Back in the 70s and 80s, detergents had all kinds of phosphorus. People were washing their suds down the drain. There's been a lot of science that has taught us that that's maybe not the best way of dealing with those things. So we're really seeing water quality is improving. The one outlier to that is chlorides, and that's essentially coming from salt that's applied both to roads and to private areas like parking lots. So that's one area where we'd like to focus on getting those scores back up.
But there has been progress in the last 20 years,
There has been.
positive
Absolutely.
progress.
Yep.
But there's still some work to do.
Always, yes.
And I'm sure it is always. We can never relax on this. We can never
Exactly.
relax or take anything
Exactly.
for granted. Excuse me, Hassan, you are I got a bit of a cold. You're the Chief Administrative Officer. Who do you report to?
Well, conservation authorities, the governance structure is that we have a board of directors. Members of the board of directors are appointed by the municipalities that are within the watershed based on a formula. So depending on how much of a municipality is in the watershed,
Right.
you get X number of people appointed to our
I know
board.
we have 4 from Burlington.
You have 4 from Burlington, and it's up to the municipality to whether they would like to appoint elected officials or residents from their municipality. So in Burlington, there's been a bit of a tradition, if I call it that, of trying to balance appointing members that are from the community as opposed to those who are just elected officials. So we have from Burlington on our board 1 elected official, a councillor, and we have 3 citizen appointees. And so it's the board that I essentially report to.
And the total board is how many people?
18 people.
And your funding comes from where?
Well, so it's interesting. Our funding, we're a bit unique within the Conservation Authorities movement. So our budget is about $33 million. We actually raise 2/3 of that ourselves. So 1/3 of our budget is funded by the municipalities, which is, again, it's divided up based on what percentage of a municipality is within the watershed. So as I mentioned earlier, because we've got parts of Mississauga and Hamilton and Wellington County and Halton region, the 30% of our budget that comes from the municipalities is divided amongst those. The biggest chunk of that is Halton region.
So 2/3 of that would come from Halton region, or more?
A bit more than that. Yeah. So of the 1/3 total budget,
right,
about 92% would come from Halton region, which is about $9 million.
Yeah. Yeah, I know we'll be dealing with the budget very soon, and,
yes,
and I'm sure we're going to approve another little increase for you.
I hope so.
This year that happens. That happens every year.
Yes.
Conservation Halton, as I mentioned, you have these great attractions. I guess that's a tremendous contributor to the 2/3 of the revenue that you do generate. So are those areas profitable that can help subsidize the other areas?
Yes. So we, again, I think it's important to recognize what role recreation plays within a conservation authority, because we get asked that question quite a bit. So we own about 10,000 acres of land. We're the largest landowner, I believe, within the region. And about 70% of those lands are protected. The other 30% are also protected as a sustainable approach to recreation. And we made a decision quite a few years ago that we're going to try and really achieve true sustainability. So we have to manage the needs of the community, which is access to green space, good, safe, family-oriented social spaces. We're going to manage the environment, so we have to look at visitor impact, so we're not degrading these areas. And we're going to try and also manage the economics of the whole thing. And so in applying that lens, you're absolutely right. We do actually generate a profit. It's not a huge profit, but it's about $1 million, $1.5 million, and that gets invested right back into those conservation areas to improve services.
Excellent. Well, that's good timing, because we're going to show a video while we take a little break about the tremendous offerings that Conservation Halton has for the people of the area.
Right.
We're going to take a quick break. You can see this video, and we'll be right back on Burlington Matters with our two guests from Conservation Halton. Welcome back to Burlington Matters. I'm Mayor Rick Goldring, and today we're discussing the role of the Conservation Halton in the city of Burlington, the whole region of Halton, and the whole watershed that the Conservation Authority looks after. Hassan Bassat and Kim Barrett are my guests today, and we want to talk about flood control. I mean, obviously the flood that we had in Burlington on August the 4th, 2014 was a significant event for many people. There were about 3,500 homes that were flooded, a number of businesses, including my own home, in a significant way. What is the role of the Conservation Authority in flood control?
Right. So, broadly speaking, Conservation Authority is one of their mandated responsibilities are responsible for looking at surface flooding from river systems, creek systems. And each watershed is very unique. As you can imagine, if you drive across the 401 and you drive across the province, you go from areas that are quite flat, you go from areas such as ours where you have the escarpment, and then you've got low-lying areas as you get closer to the lake. And so each Conservation Authority, as we were kind of starting to get formed through the various communities in Ontario, the impetus to really push us into looking at flood control came from Hurricane Hazel, which was quite devastating. And that gave everybody an opportunity to look at what happened, establish some standards so we can actually try and manage future events to some sort of standard to say, okay, we can't have this happen again, or we can't have the damage from it be as severe as it was back then. So as a part of that, the approach to flood management has evolved over the years. Back when CAs were formed in the 40s, 50s, 60s, a lot of emphasis went on trying to engineer our way out of flood issues. And so that meant expropriation of land, reservoirs, dams, man-made channels to divert water away from low-lying areas or areas that were downstream. And so we today have a mix of structures that were created back in the 60s, so that's 4 dams, and a lot of people will know, they'll know the parks if I mention them, so Mountsburg, Kelso, Halton Falls, they're reservoirs, and people enjoy taking part in recreational activities there. But essentially, they're there because that's where the dams and went to try and kind of hold back the water. So our role is looking at all of that. But over the last 12 months, and certainly, as you mentioned, the floods of 2014, there's always an opportunity to take a pause and look at it and say, is the approach that we've been taking relevant today? Can it be improved? Is there a way to modernize all of this? And so over the past 12 months, we've really embarked on a modernization plan, and it at its root is trying to look at how we can better monitor these situations, how we can give more lead time to municipalities and everybody else when an event is predicted to occur, and how good are our operations during an event as well as post-event, where we can go and see what happened, so we can model these things and then use it to refine moving forward.
So I was out of town on August the 4th, 2014, and had to come home, obviously.
Yes.
But I don't believe there was much warning of the event that happened in Burlington from anybody, from any weather forecaster, including Conservation Halton.
Yes.
So you anticipate being able to improve that going forward?
Yes, and you're absolutely right.
Recognizing you can't predict everything.
We can't predict everything, but we can certainly try and improve that situation. And if you go back to what I said earlier, CAs, their role in flood management really kind of solidified around Hurricane Hazel. Right. And so the threat back then that we were trying to address was hurricanes. And if you know anything about hurricanes, they're massive. You know days in advance that they're coming. You sort of know where they're coming, and they cover a large area. And so all of the gauges and networks that were set up were done so that you can track hurricanes. What we're getting today, more frequently, through climate change, are more smaller storms that are very centralized. Right. And so the gauge network has to be upgraded so that there aren't essentially hurricane-sized gaps in the monitoring network, and we've done that, and are continuing to improve that. In fact, the improvements over the past 12 to 18 months have been remarkable. We've worked with all of our municipal partners. Everybody had gauges, and they were there for different reasons. And what Conservation Halton has done is we've sat down and said, we can take data from all of these gauges to fill in the gaps. And then we can do better analysis, better modeling, and issue better messages. So I'm quite confident that we are much better than we were in 2014, and we're going to be even better over the next 12 or 18 months.
That is great to hear.
That
is obviously great to hear, because adaptation to climate change is a significant issue that we need to be aggressive on. Absolutely. Yes. Kim, you're involved in different outreach programs with regard to what Conservation Halton does. and recognizing that this whole area that we live in the Greater Toronto Hamilton area, is going to grow from the current population of 7 million people to 10 million. Halton region by itself is going to almost double in the next 25 years. So as we urbanize, the importance of connecting with nature, I would say, has never been more important. What's your comments on that, and what are the programs that you have to connect particularly younger people and others with nature?
Well, one of our programs, excuse me, actually builds on what you and Hassan were just talking about, and that's what happens when it rains. Where does all that water go? So a lot of our programming and outreach is focused on helping people understand exactly where that rainwater goes. So traditionally, our approach has been to funnel water into creeks and move it off the landscape as quickly as possible. What that leads to is that eventually, when we get these more frequent and intense storms, the infrastructure is just not sized to handle it. So we're really evolving the way that we think about stormwater management in Ontario from that perspective to having it infiltrate into the ground as much as possible at the source to avoid having those big runoff events. So a lot of our outreach work teaches landowners. We have specialized homeowner workshops that teach people about just the basics of stormwater management, why stormwater management ponds are there, what purpose they serve. And also we talk about things that people can do on their own properties to help infiltrate that stormwater into the ground as opposed to having it run off. So there are things that people can do, like installing rain barrels, for example, where you can hold the water that comes down during those flood events and then disperse it, water it into your garden at different times of the year when it's drier. There are also things that people can do, like building a rain garden, so directing your downspouts into those rain gardens and having the water again infiltrate into the ground. And actually the province is moving forward. So the province essentially has a stormwater management guideline that all municipalities and conservation authorities work to at the moment, which is due to be upgraded, or a new version is going to be released probably by the end of this year. And the focus of the new guidelines will really be on infiltrating the stormwater into the ground as opposed to having it run off into these large ponds.
And that's something the region of Halton is working on. That's something the city of Burlington, all the local municipalities within the catchment area, the conservation Halton, they're all working on.
That's right. It's a provincial
together.
document, so it'll apply across the board.
Tell us about some of the events that you have throughout the year to help younger people connect with the natural environment.
Sure. Well, one great one that just wrapped up the last week of September is the Halton Children's Water Festival. So that's an event that's been running for 12 years now. And I think as of this past year, we'd had something like 42,000 children come through the program. So it's geared to grades 2 to 5. And it's all based on curriculum-linked activities that relate to water in some way, water and science, water and environmental health, all these different themes that are linked directly to the curriculum of each grade. So essentially we have the event at Kelso. We have 58 or so different stations that are set up with each theme. And what we do that I think is pretty innovative is we have high school students come in and essentially teach those units to the younger kids, to the grade 2 to 5 kids. And I think by involving children of different ages, I know my little kids really look up to bigger kids. So I can tell them all I want about, you should do this or you should do that. But if they hear it from a high school student, I think it really sinks in more.
Last thing I want to talk about, we don't have a lot of time left, is the whole planning involvement as a regulatory authority. So I know that people that live in North Burlington sometimes feel that they're encumbered by a City of Burlington zoning bylaw, a City of Burlington official plan, a Halton Region official plan, Conservation Authority, the Niagara Escarpment Commission plan. There's so many different layers of regulation that come into it. What's your comment as far as the regulatory role, Hassan, of Conservation Halton, and how you can proactively work with people that do want to have some sort of changes to their properties in different parts, close to critically important natural areas?
So I think people who live in North Burlington and feel that they're encumbered are absolutely correct. They are. There are lots of layers to environmental planning and municipal planning and everything. Essentially, the end result for a homeowner is to be able to do something. And then they have to go through a lot of processes to get that. Now, the good thing is that even though we have regulatory requirements, the primary focus of those requirements is to look at the entire issue of flooding and hazard lands from a proactive standpoint, so that we're not constantly trying to engineer our way out of problems, because we know what we know today, and that's how CAs have functioned. That's how the province functions, which is you go with the best science. The best science many years ago told us that you have bodies of water, and associated with each body of water you have a floodplain, and usually that floodplain has some sort of valley or slopes associated with it. What does that mean? It means that that area of land around that body of water belongs to that body of water. It will encroach in that space given certain storm events. That storm event for us is standardized. It's either the regional storm or the 1 in 100 year storm. So that's the essence of our regulations. They're meant primarily to keep people out of harm's way. What we've been working on quite diligently over the past few years is trying to make that process as predictable, as easy, as convenient, as one window as we can. So today, a resident in North Burlington doesn't have to worry about who am I going to have to go to. All they have to do is go to their municipality. Their municipality has all of the screening maps, and they will lay it out for the resident to say, you're going to have to meet the requirements of these agencies. And then all of that gets collected, goes back to the municipality, and they issue the final sign-off. So it is a cumbersome process. It can be a long process, but it doesn't have to be. And so we've done quite a bit on our website and educating people. We reach out. We've started going to all of the home shows and reno shows, so we can get, the big developers. Or big businesses that are hiring lots of professionals to help them do this, they can figure all of this out. But if you're a homeowner and you're just trying to extend your deck and it's in a regulated area, you're not going to know all of these things, and chances are the weekend before you're starting to build, you may realize that there's a Conservation Authority permit required, and that can be very frustrating as a homeowner. So we're trying to reach out more and make that process easier.
Hassan, thank you very much, and Kim, Barrett, thank you very much to the two of you for sharing your time with us today and sharing your expertise and talking about something that you're obviously both passionate about, and that's your roles within the Conservation Authority of Conservation Halton. So we thank you very much for sharing your insights with us. And I want to thank you for tuning in to your TV, truly local television, and watching Burlington Matters. We'll see you next time. I'm Eric Goldring. Take care.